What's going on? The Gojiboy strikes again, Autophagy. I wanted to add some comments to his most recent video for people who would like to get a little bit of a deeper understanding on the subject. First of all, autophagy is not cleaning out damaged cells, quote unquote, as he calls it. It's more a tool which still living cells have to engulf damaged cell organelles, to recycle their constituents, so to say, these nutrients that make them up, like proteins, lipids, and so on and so forth, to get some energy back essentially, and to get some building blocks back. So it's not like whole cells are dying there. I mean, the consequences of too much autophagy can be that cells die, probably, but autophagy is basically a cell eating itself, but it doesn't kill itself. This is another different thing, which is actually called programmed cell death or apoptosis. So when whole cells die, on their own, basically, this is called apoptosis or programmed cell death. And there is also another option here, which is that special cells of your immune system decide to engulf and dissolve cells. This happens, for example, sometimes when you have cancer or stuff like that. Cancer cells can be literally eaten up by your immune system if your immune system is strong enough, quote unquote, if it is able to distinguish those cells well enough from still healthy cells. They will filter those guys out and simply eat them up. This is a process that happens very frequently, for example, in your lymph nodes, where a lot of your immune system sits and a lot of flow of extracellular fluid happens, a lot of stuff, a lot of toxins flow by, and these immune cells engulf them and make them detoxify that stuff essentially. So apoptosis is cell death, programmed cell death, when whole cells die, and autophagy is an ability of a single cell to recycle its used up or damaged or whatever toxified cell organelles. Now, as usual, he goes on with sounding sophisticated about a certain protein that regulates, autophagy, and you can switch it on and off, blah, blah, blah. But what he doesn't really talk about, which is a very important question, and not mentioned at all by him, is it any good? Is it good to have autophagy? Is it actually something that you should have a lot of in your body? The fact is that it is still very little understood. What we know is that autophagy is basically a starvation response. The thing is, and this makes a lot of sense, when people fast, when people starve, so when people fast, quote unquote, their cells still need some nutrients. Their cells still need energy to run, because otherwise you simply die instantly. So it would only make sense to switch on autophagy, to switch on more autophagy in cells, to make more nutrients accessible, to make more lipids, for example, which would otherwise constitute cell membranes or stuff like that, available for lipolysis, to make energy out of these lipids, to burn them in the mitochondria with oxygen to get some energy, to get more ATP, to run muscles like the heart and your breathing system, your lungs and stuff like that. You still have to live, okay? So fasting, of course, will switch on autophagy. Now, still, the question remains, is that any good? Is it good to fast, The other thing is, and this is very often brought up, that autophagy is a quote-unquote cleaning of, damaged cell stuff and of toxicity and whatnot, a detoxifying process essentially. Now, here I can ask the question, is cleaning really necessary in a already clean body? Or is cleaning only necessary where there is a lot of dirt? Okay, so like if you're predominantly on a very raw diet, then there will probably very little cleaning be necessary in your body, because your body is not very toxic. And essentially your body will only turn on autophagy, or will only have to turn on autophagy in a fasting mode, in a starvation mode essentially. And then you simply want to prevent autophagy because it's not necessary, Why would you lose these cells, why would you lose these cell organelles, and might even result in cell death, in programmed cell death, when you can just preserve these nutrients, preserve these calories to survive longer in the long run, This brings up an interesting point, which I would call the fat analogy in this context. Nowadays, you can be fat in very different ways. You can be, like most people, fat in a very unhealthy way, because a lot of the fats that we eat today are basically hardened vegetable oils, fried vegetable oils, heated to an extreme degree, which are oxidized, which are, transformed into trans fats. And all of this stuff is, of course, you can basically reconstruct the diet of a human being by looking at the constituents of his or her fat tissue. This is just very similar to pigs, where you can do the same. That's why in Spain the pigs are held in these forests, where there's a lot of nuts and stuff, because then these pigs eat a lot of these nuts, and then the fats from the nuts go into the fat of the pigs, and these fatty pigs have very high amounts of omega-3 fatty acids and whatnot, So you see, the composition of your fat tissue depends on what you eat. Now that brings up an important point, because today we are actually able to stuff a lot of junk food, a lot of processed junk food down our face, And this, of course, contains a hell lot of fried vegetable oils, a hell lot of trans fats, and these fats go into your fatty tissue, and then they wait there until they are metabolized or, utilized in some sort of other way. So what I want to say with that is, you can be fat in a very unhealthy way, in a very dirty way, quote unquote, but only 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 years ago, this was not possible, When we were still on a raw diet, naturally, if you could manage to get fat on such a diet, your fat would be of extremely high quality. It would be an extremely high quality fat that would basically enable you to survive with nothing but that for a very long time. It would be filled with fat soluble vitamins. It would be filled with all sorts of minerals. It's basically, a backpack which allows you to go for a long, long distance, without needing any food. And in such a body, autophagy is just a way of, getting energy. This is the autophagy of fatty cells, for example, So you're just basically getting the energy of your fat cells, but there is no real need to clean out anything toxic or anything, okay? This is only necessary because we stuff so much toxins down our throat nowadays. So again, is autophagy really something good? Is it something that you should strive for on a regular basis? Now, I would argue in our modern society, where we are, more or less forced to some degree to be toxic in a certain way, it would probably be helpful if on a regular basis you get at least some autophagy in. Which means for me, and this is the next fallacy that Gojiboy makes here, he says that you have to be in keto, you have to make keto diet, you have to make a protein fast to be in autophagy. No, keto diets are extremely unnatural, also for carnivores. If a carnivore wants autophagy or wants to increase its autophagy, which again is only really necessary if you're living in a toxic environment like we do nowadays, then he should simply fast. Okay, fasting just increases your autophagy. Fasting for ketosis definitely increases autophagy, and this is only natural, this is only logical, because your body again has to get access to these energy resources, which it otherwise wouldn't have. So yeah, really, in this process of making old energy available in a new way to your body, you will at the same time detoxify certain things, because It's only the weakest and the most damaged cells which undergo the process of autophagy, and then later on also probably the process of cell death. But this brings up another interesting point. In science they recognize that programmed cell death, apoptosis, is very often very accompanied by autophagy. But what they still don't know is that whether it is the autophagy that causes the programmed cell death, or whether the autophagy is actually trying to prevent the programmed cell death, and as kind of a survival mechanism of that cell, to still prevent death, basically. So even on the cellular level, when we take a look at single cells, we still don't know whether autophagy is something helpful, or whether it is something that is just a last resort for these cells to survive, but actually has to be avoided or should be avoided. Now, I would argue, based on all of these, we didn't dive into a lot of science today, but we just used a bit of common sense here. In a very clean individual, autophagy probably only should occur when starving, and starving in general shouldn't occur if the individual is smart, if it has a lot of success with hunting and stuff like that. Same goes, of course, for plant eaters. If plant eaters have access to enough of food, to enough raw foods like it is in nature, I mean, you won't go and tell a gazelle to fast because then it increases its autophagy, right? You wouldn't do that. The gazelle just eats, and when there is nothing to eat, then it has to turn on autophagy to get access to old energy resources, but it doesn't really have to detoxify anything, There shouldn't be no need for that. And therefore, in a natural, healthy, clean being, autophagy is probably only a response to starvation and not really anything that has to do with detoxifying. So, I hope I could really give you here a little bit of a more comprehensive view on autophagy in general. Something that he mentioned as well is the connection with intermittent fasting and autophagy and stuff. Intermittent fasting basically means that you eat one meal a day, as I understood it. And one meal a day will not get you really deep into fasting forced ketosis. So if you're eating one meal a day on a regular basis, you still never really fast. Okay, I mean, eating one meal a day is certainly a lot healthier than eating 5 meals a day, or even at a higher frequency. But it certainly doesn't come close to getting a really fasting forced ketosis, which for some individuals takes 30 hours. For some individuals, it goes faster, quicker, in 20 hours. But if you want that autophagy, if you want to force it because you think that you're very toxic or whatever, if you want to clean out, old stuff, then you should aim for fasting forced ketosis, which, takes at least 30 hours fasting time. And this, of course, has nothing to do with intermittent fasting anymore. And this is also not really doable in a higher frequency than maybe once a week, So much for the fasting part. But again, why induce starvation if you're clean already? This should be your first goal, to get as clean as possible in the first sense, and then autophagy for a detoxifying aspect is not really necessary. Autophagy will only help, in terms of starvation if there is no food available. So, another thing is that he's saying, which I just want to briefly comment on, and then I'll let you go. Is it difficult to achieve autophagy on a carnivore diet? He says, of course, yeah, it is difficult because you're eating so much protein and stuff, which of course has nothing to do with it. It is not harder to achieve autophagy on a carnivore diet because, than on a vegan diet. Why? Because fasting is a lot easier when you get proper food in times you don't fast. Meaning that if you have a proper eating, contrast, which means eating proper food during the time of eating and fasting properly during the time of fasting, this is contrast in your eating habits, you know. On a vegan diet, you will notice that you're always hungry because you never get real proper food in. And this will make it almost impossible to fast because, in fact, you're fasting all the time. You're fasting yourself of certain nutrients, of certain foods, which are, in fact, very necessary for us human beings. So fasting properly, which means, you know, getting your insulin very low, getting your autophagy high, getting that really deep fasting forced ketosis, will be a lot easier on will be a lot harder on a vegan diet and a lot easier on a carnivore diet. So that being said, is it really so difficult to achieve autophagy on a carnivore diet? I wouldn't say so, because it's a lot easier to fast on a carnivore diet and therefore a lot easier to actually achieve autophagy. If you actually want that, again, it is not clear whether it is something good or not. Okay, I would argue not really if you're clean already. Other than that, you know, if eating predominantly raw and not over exercising, there shouldn't be so much toxins in your body that there is any need to clean out damaged cell tissue or damaged cells in general and stuff like that. All right, so I hope that was somehow informational.